Okay, good evening. I'm Hazel Hayden and I'm here to talk on behalf of Parents Against Child Benefit Cuts and PACUP, and of course the families with children in this country. So barely a month ago the children's referendum was passed. Now in one fell swoop the government have savagely attacked children's welfare. Not only did they reduce child benefit for a fourth year, but bigger families were hit more severely once again. The cuts are as follows: €10 for the first two, 18 for the third, and 20 for the fourth and subsequent child. They're not finished yet either. There's another €10 per child a month coming down the line next year. Where are all the pre-election promises now? Vote Labour, we will not cut child benefit. On top of these cuts, other families have been hit with a multiple of cuts: a trebling in prescription fees for people with medical cards, an increase in the drugs payment scheme to €144 per month, cuts to school, back to school allowance to the tune of €50 for both rates, a hike in car tax, older cars being hit the most, and of course we all have them because we can't afford the newer ones, a hike in PRSI, which is going to equate to around €20 per month, a hike in carbon tax, which is going to up your coal and your briquettes, the property tax when most of us with children and otherwise are stuck in negative equity, and the taxing of maternity benefit at a time when you have huge expenses. Also, a cut in the respite grant for people with children and other carers. And let's not forget the college fees going up to €2,500, €2,750 and €3,000 respectively in the next 3 years. One thinks college will revert back to just being for the elite. When you put all these cuts together, it's not just depressing, it's very, very scary for us low and middle income families. I recall Eamon Gilmore's speech to the Youth Council recently. The people who founded this party 100 years ago came from nothing. They came from tenement buildings and thatched cottages. What they wanted was bread on the table, a roof over their heads, schools for their children, affordable healthcare, and above all they wanted jobs, good secure jobs and a decent home. This is all people still want, but Labour and Fine Gael are taking these basic rights away from the people of Ireland. As said in various reports, over 250,000 people are unable to afford their energy bills. Some people are actually opting to have their supplies turned off because they're so far in arrears. 10% of people are living in food poverty, that's unable to afford a nutritionally balanced diet. There are thousands of people in mortgage arrears, and you have now thrown the property tax into the mix. Yes, they'll be given a concession for those on low incomes, but at a cost. Let's not forget, child benefit is the only payment received in recognition of children in this country. It is not a handout, it is a return of tax already paid. We do not have free healthcare, free education or subsidised childcare. Children in Ireland, childcare in Ireland is one of the highest rates in the OECD, and also children are not recognised in the Irish tax system. Now on to economic growth. The government should look on it as a wise move to protect those who are most likely to spend, but instead they are in effect closing the country down. Low and middle income families spend all of their income because they have to. They live week to week. They have no extra disposable income. Most mothers who receive child benefit go straight out and purchase what their child needs at the start of every month. At a time when we need economic growth, the government has reduced our spending power. You don't need to have a degree in economics to figure out that more cuts equals less spending, bringing in less revenue, which will impact on us further next year. It's one vicious circle. And I'll say one last thing. We ran a survey on the cuts to child benefit before the cuts were implemented, and these are a few of the extracts that we got. This was from a person on social welfare. I seriously don't know how we would manage to buy shoes and clothes and any extras the kids would need. This is low-income families. This is actually shocking. We cannot pay bills as it is, so maybe we will cut back even more on food, heat, etc. We burn pallets or whatever we can in the stove to heat our house. I walk the kids to school instead of using my car. The only meat the kids get is mince, as I cannot afford anything else. I have nothing after I buy a meagre shop and pay my bills. Do they want us all in one bed in the dark to save electricity and heat? And then we had the middle income families who said they'll be affected drastically. They will have no money to pay for their childcare, so they'll have to give up work. In effect, people that are working will be priced out of work. If this is the government's idea of a fair budget, I dread to think of what else they have up their sleeves. There are other ways to save this money, which they will not look at, as it will affect them, as they are all high earners. Well, enough is enough. We cannot sit back any longer and take the pain while they feel none. It's time to tell the government we will not take these unfair attacks on our families anymore.
First time public statement.
Thank you.
Well done, Hazel.
Thanks.
Let's call on Ailbhe next.
Thank you very much, Francis, and thank you very much, Francis. Hazel, I was going to cover some of that material, so I hope there's not too much a repetition, but I have to say that, you know, you're speaking for the first time, but it just actually shows you that this budget and successive budgets really have hit so hard. People are now standing up who didn't stand up before and who weren't so angry before, are now becoming political, are now becoming mobilised and saying just exactly what you were saying. That's absolutely enough. We've seen too much misery. We're feeling the hit too much. We want to do something about it, which of course is why very much we're here this evening, to work out what we can actually do to counter it. But just today, you probably noticed in the papers, I heard on the news, that Ireland has now got the distinction of being in the top league of jobless households. 22% of households in Ireland are now jobless. That is to say that no one in those households has a job. And of course, we know that we're in the top league for swinging attacks on the most vulnerable people, the poorest people, those least able to defend themselves, those least likely to have protections such as trade unions or indeed to be members of other powerful NGO-type organisations, those least likely, therefore, to be able to lobby and to negotiate deals with government. And that struck me really strongly when I was reading something just the other day, which reminded me about the deal that the pharmaceuticals industry in Ireland did with the government in the summer. And the anticipated gain that the government expected from this new pay deal with the pharmaceuticals industry, how much it was going to pay them for medication which is used through the HSE. They anticipated a gain of 400 million. And this was touted to us as being a very considerable win-win situation for the government. In fact, what they emerged with was 50% of that, 200 million. Why? Because obviously the pharmaceutical industry is very powerful, and it shook its fist at government and said, if you don't give us what we want, or if you don't do the kind of deal we're prepared to negotiate, we'll pull the jobs and we'll go elsewhere. So there's that kind of blackmail going on. But the kind of people that I'm talking about and that Hazel is talking about, actually people like us, we don't have that kind of power. We can't go into government and negotiate. So we're in the top league for all the wrong reasons. Indeed, another reason why we're in the top league is for offering low corporation taxes to multinationals who have been completely untouched by this budget. And I notice and I'm sure you've all noticed, that in the UK at the moment, there's a lot of fight going on, precisely because big multinationals like Google, like Starbucks, like the others, are not actually paying their taxes in the UK. What, I want to know, are they paying here? How much are the big multinationals actually paying here? Are they even paying the small percentage that they're supposed to? Now, I make those comments because I think that they're actually at the root of this incredibly, profoundly inegalitarian and deeply divisive budget. And I think when, listening to people over the past week, looking at what's going on, drawing on our own experiences on the ground, it strikes me, as I'm sure it struck every single one of you, that what this budget is doing yet again is even widening, making even wider that gap between the rich and everybody else. It used to be a gap between rich and poor, but it now really is a gap between the rich and everyone else. So that we're getting this class-graded society in quite a lot of detail, which is extremely depressing. And I think that we need to be naming this. We have the super rich elite, most of whom pay few or absolutely no taxes at all. We have rich professional and upper managerial classes who are experiencing what you might call a slight dip in income. But basically, if you're on an income of over 200,000, if you're on an income of 100,000 a year, a dip's nothing. It doesn't mean anything to you. You don't have to go on porridge for 3 meals a day, as some of the women I work with are actually doing with their kids at the moment. Porridge 3 times a day. We have a middle class increasingly struggling and hit by redundancy, youth emigration, negative equity, the things that you were mentioning there, Hazel. And that's for sure. And St Vincent de Paul is constantly telling us that actually they're dealing with increasing numbers of middle class families who simply cannot manage on what they have. We've a working class even more desperately struggling to keep heads above water for exactly the same reasons, and a class of working poor. And there are new figures coming out on the working poor, actually I think tomorrow morning, who it's not that they can't keep their heads above water. This budget is actively pushing their heads under the water with the withdrawal of the various cuts that we've heard about. And of course there are people who are dependent on social welfare through unemployment, and long-term unemployment is growing, through their age, through a disability, or because they're engaged in care duties and responsibilities, which the state has historically failed to assume its own responsibility to citizens for. So caring, people who are carers in one shape or form are typically dependent on social welfare and are extremely vulnerable, therefore, to cuts by a government which goes for the easy targets. And there was a very touching photograph in the Irish Times, at least on the website today, of a young chappie with glasses and a red anorak, aged about 7, and he was holding up a little placard that said easy target, and I think he was a Down syndrome child. So, you know, it was very touching, and it did sum up absolutely what is going on. That was at a carer's protest. Of course he's an easy target, and the mammy or the daddy or the mammy and the daddy who are looking after him are easy targets. They can't even usually get out on the street to go and protest at meetings. It's not part of their daily routine. They can't really go to evening meetings like this. Who's going to look after that little chap in the red anorak? So, and who is going to be speaking up for those people? There was a woman on front line last night from the Carers Association, I don't know if you saw her, who tried indeed to speak up and who pointed out to Pat Kenny that the government minister and the this and the that and the other who were lined up on the panel, that they could use their voices, they had power, but that basically people who are caring, actually who are in caring situations don't. So I think I wanted to make that point really very, very strongly, that you actually were looking also at, we're looking at the impoverishment of people, and we are also looking at their disempowerment. So it really is important for us to actually be out there encouraging, saying to people, do not let your voice be taken away. Do not let yourself be disempowered by this. And it really is up to us to try and put structures on that. Just, I won't go on very much longer, but just to make perhaps 1 or 2 small points in a way. It is, of course, a very cruel, a very sadistically cruel budget. And I think that it's also very important for us to keep in mind that this budget is another layer on a whole series of cumulative cuts over the past several years. So that when the government says, well, 325 is not that much to cut off the carers grant allowance, because basically, but there have been so many other cuts along the line. There are all the other cuts that are coming in by step. The core social welfare benefit payments are maintained, and Joan Bruton is sickeningly proud of this, while everything else is being cut by step, whether it's prescriptions, whether it's medical card that you used to pay 135, now you pay 144, whether it's the fuel allowances, whatever it is, everything along the edges is being cut. They don't understand that people whose incomes are marginal live on the margins, and if you cut the margins, they disappear. And I think that that's what we have to bear in mind. We talk a lot about the cuts, inevitably at the moment this much of child benefit, this much of back to school allowance, this much of carbon tax, the carbon tax and so on and so forth. But of course the other thing coming down the line that we have to grapple with is the cuts in services, in education, but very significantly in health, in social services of all kinds, and to say that the people who will suffer most from those cuts are the people who have to use those services, so that people whose benefits are cut will also have the double whammy effect of being cut in terms of their access to highly reduced and possibly even, I'm sad to say it, substandard services. So we really are looking at from every perspective at actually a rather revolting situation where there doesn't seem to be any sense of real direction, and there certainly don't seem to be any principles of social welfare, that is to say the well-being and the good of the citizens as a whole involved in making the decisions that our budget makers have made. The fact that it is a very harsh budget for women in our caring roles, I think it is not, it cannot be disconnected from the fact that the inner sanctum of the budget deciders for men, that our DOI continues to be 85% male and therefore only 15% female. It is really very important that our democracy open up to a wide range of citizens, including women. Thank you very much.
Michael, let you come in.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for inviting me here to talk. I'm actually not going to give an overview of austerity. I think we're all familiar with it after 4 years. I think that if we have not experienced it in the way that Hazel outlined, then certainly we can see it about us if we only have our eyes. I do want to mention a couple of things, and then from that, since this is a meeting about how we fight the cuts, and I don't think it's about just kind of fighting budget 2013. I mean, this is a long game. So I kind of actually want to talk about what can we expect from the trade union movement and how we can move that on, because after all, I work for a trade union, I work for Unite. I think most of the time it's fair to say that Unite is not on the majority side of issues in the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, but we work with other unions and we work with other people, other social organizations to try to bring trade union movement on board towards progressive positions. I'll just say this, I don't understand why this is not getting bigger news. I mean, I've tried to write about it, I've sent stuff to TDs and all that, and not to Richard, because I don't have to send my material to Richard. Richard picks up the issues and he doesn't need me to highlight to him. But when the government took office, unemployment was 14.2%. In the budget projections that they issued, and I also issued this last month in what's called a medium-term fiscal statement. Never mind, they pre-budgeted. So they announced this last month, but they reinforced in the budget. They admit now that by 2015, unemployment will fall to 13%. Over the lifetime of this government, they will only manage to reduce unemployment by 1 percentage point. And the way the way that's going to happen is not because they're going to be creating jobs to fill that 1% gap. There's going to be very little net job creation in 2015. It is because of immigration. Were it not for immigration, unemployment would be substantially higher. I just think that's an amazing thing. I mean, the government has produced a jobs initiative. I think it was a 74 or 78 point action plan for jobs, 2 job creation budgets, and a 10-point plan in the recent budget. And actually in the fine print, if anybody wants to look, if any of the journalists want to, get a little bit busy and look at some of the stuff, actually the government's saying their employment policies are failing. That's the first point I want to make. Because whereas there's some very creative accounting in budget, Department of Finance's numbers in terms of deficits and GDP and growth and all that. And I don't mind that, because that's why you hire up anybody in the Department of Finance anywhere in the world to kind of do that. It's hard to hide up the grim reality of unemployment. That's something that you can't statistically magical way. The second thing is the level of deprivation. Again, I'm flummoxed that this has not become a larger issue. Now, let's be clear about deprivation. I mean, we're not talking about tenement buildings, tenement Dublin in the 19 teens and 1920s. This is modern day deprivation, what one commentator called drive-by deprivation. And what he was referring to was the phenomena that we drive down the motorways or the main highways, and there's all these housing estates that we don't pass. We pass by on the motorway, but you'd have to go off on the ramp to get to them. But we drive past those, but in those housing estates, which actually look quite nice in some cases, reasonably, modest, but clean and all that, nice neighborhoods, but inside those houses are people experiencing deprivation. There's actually an official rate for it. The CSO produces it. Over 1 million people suffer multiple deprivation experiences. That's nearly one in 4. It's an incredible number. Over 1 million. That has grown by 60% in the period 2008-2010. By the way, that's a 2010 figure. God knows what the deprivation rate's going to be after Budget 2011, Budget 2012, and Budget 2013. Unfortunately, it takes a long time for the CSO to compile this stuff, so we won't have a picture of even 2011 until sometime next year. 350,000 children make up that number. Nearly 1 in 3 of every child lives in a household that experiences multiple deprivation. One of the highest in the EU 15. We compete with Greece for this. And this is not a relative measure, this is an absolute measurement. This is a questionnaire that is surveyed in every EU country to get a proper comparison. Again, I am just shocked that has not become more of an issue. So the two things, unemployment and deprivation. And so when we look at the politics of austerity, we can begin to understand it. Now, I'm as guilty as anybody else by saying that austerity doesn't work. And I usually try to do that in terms of a kind of a broader economic analysis. But of course it does work. Of course it does work. Austerity represents the transfer of resources from workers to capital and from those on low incomes to those on high incomes. And unemployment and deprivation rates give pretty good evidence of that. Now, I want to talk about the trade union movement. I think it's fair to say that trade union movement hasn't been as robust in its response to the government's austerity strategy. I think it's fair to say that the trade union movement has let down a lot of people, including a lot of trade unions. Certainly we ourselves in Unite are aware of that. Other activists, progressive activists, shop stewards and officials and other unions are aware of that. Maybe I try to be too optimistic. Maybe I try to look for any kind of green shoot upon which the seeds of progressive politics can be built. But I get a sense that something might be changing. I don't know what it would do, but I think it's an opportunity for us to constructively engage with the trade union movement, and especially to work with those within the movement who are trying to get the trade unions to move towards a more robust role of leadership against austerity. Certainly, the march on February 9th is an opportunity to...
Excuse me. Please don't say February is an opportunity. That's your mom begs, asking us to support the government. Please.
Well, let them finish.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sure.
We'll have plenty of time to come in and make points in a few minutes. Don't worry.
Thanks.
Well, I can talk to you about the politics of what February 9th has been called for. It's not the politics that I would do it, yes. But here's an opportunity for members, shop stewards, trade unions, and civil society organizations to participate in that, and to swell the ranks, and for us to give our own stamp on that. But I'm well aware of the shortcomings. I just told you about the shortcomings, and they are not being resolved. I'm trying to find some constructive ways to engage with this. So that's the first thing. Secondly, it's been a long time since I heard a trade union leader talk about social protection. I think it's fair to say that the trade union movement has not paid enough attention to social conditions like deprivation, rising inequality, and the hollowing out of the social protection system, etc. But that's, of course, what SIP2 has done when they called for moving forward the tax on pensions, so we can stop these social protection cuts. That's something new. The consistent trade union demand for investment. Now, some people might think this is abstract. I can assure you, it's not. The government will cut €500 million investment next year. That'll be a loss of 8,000 jobs. And then, under the radar, without announcing this, they're going to cut another $500 million in 2014. This was not expected. They had actually given a commitment to stop cutting investment after 2013. This is under the radar, and that's another 8,000 jobs gone. Now, it's going to dawn eventually on the trade union movement that this is a government that's not interested in our ideas on investment, not interested in our ideas on how you promote job creation in the short term and economic growth in the long term. And finally, I'd just say that I was pleasantly surprised when the leader of ICTU went to the TWE conference and said that really we can no longer rely on the private sector to generate jobs for tens of thousands of people, and suggested that we should move towards a situation where the state becomes the employer of last resort. A position which I would fully support. And that just means that you ensure that no one is under long-term unemployment and that you provide the work for them in the community, voluntary, and public agencies. That's something that I had not heard from the trade union movement. So I get these soundings, I get these hearings. You can interpret it, if you will, as maybe this is a cynical game that's being played by a leadership that has no interest in promoting progressive politics. I don't think that would be a correct one, but I understand why it's said. However, I do know that below the level of leadership, and let's never associate the trade union movement with 1, 2, or 3 or 4 leaders. Unite is not Jimmy Kelly, any more than SITTU is Jack O'Connor, any more than the entire trade union movement is David Begg. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, and a lot of anger welling up, and you might be part of it. If you're members of trade union, your branches, or whatever, you might be part of that. A lot of anger welling up from the bottom, reaching up through the trade union ranks and to the top. And leaders have to respond to that. And that is the opportunity to intervene. So and I'll just conclude on this, many of us in the trade union movement have argued within that trade unions have been too insular, that they have not engaged with other civil society organizations, that they have not engaged with social organizations, that somehow they've been a very standoff position. We've argued against that. We've argued that trade union movement should be an equal partnership in a broad anti-austerity and progressive coalition. That's a position that we've argued. For many of us, it's been a hard one to argue. We continue to put that. And I would think too, now with these opportunities coming on board, it's time for those for social organizations, civil society organizations, to try to begin the long, hard road of engaging in a constructive dialogue with the movement. Because I do know this, if we do not build the broadest possible platform against austerity, we'll be here next year in this room, saying, what are we going to do about budget 2014 cuts and budget 2015 cuts? I don't think it'll stop there. Because remember that little thing about the fiscal treaty? We've got a lot more to come. We have to start building the broadest possible alliances. We have to start talking with each other. And I would say this on all sides, and I include myself part of it, we have to stop thinking the worst about each other and maybe trying to think, well, maybe there's a possibility that we can work together. If we do that, then maybe we won't have a repeat next year or the following year. Just a hope. Thanks.
I'm too angry to sit down when I start talking about what's going on in the country. I mostly want to talk about what I think we need to do, or put a few suggestions about what we need to do. And I think, in some ways, the time for words is over, and the time for action is upon us. And I think there's very little point in having meetings these days unless something practical comes out of it, directed towards action. And I think we need, at this meeting and every meeting like this that is being held, and there are many, I want to say to you, there's many meetings like this being held all over the country, all over the city, over the last number of months. And at all of those meetings, new faces, new forces, new people who've never been involved in politics are coming forward and saying, I want to do things. And we have to decide how we harness that new energy, that new anger, that new determination into a weapon, a political weapon, that is going to stop this austerity juggernaut and is going to establish a different way of doing things, a fair way of doing things, and establish really a different type of society with entirely different priorities from the one we now have and the one that has led us into this catastrophic situation. Most of the points have been made about the budget. I just want to add this, that if you are attempting in a surgical way to hit the most vulnerable sectors of society, you could not have done it more precisely than this government has done. It's vindictive. It's not just unfair or unjust. It is cruel and it is vindictive. It is a cold-hearted, calculated decision to make the poor pay. The figures, the stats have already been given, which demonstrated this ESRI thing today is very, very telling. Because for the last 2 years, Enda Kenny has been saying, however bad you may think it is here, it's worse in Greece. You don't want to be like Greece. And what we discover with those figures today is it isn't actually worse in Greece. It's worse here. We have a higher level of families that are jobless without any work than they have in Greece. Twice as many. Twice as many. Or as in Spain. Now, how can you explain that? Because their unemployment rate is higher than ours. But we have more households that are without work. And the reason you can have that is because our society is much more unequal. And the poverty is much more heavily concentrated. So there's whole swathes of the country where there is no work, or the vast majority of people are jobless. And they are being hit on the multiple, because the ESRI and the ESRI are not a left-wing body, are explaining how that happens, that concentration happens. It happens because you're out of work, you have a big family, and we have generally speaking by European standards, have bigger families, more financial drain on you, more difficult to get out of the trap of unemployment, and disabilities as well coming in on that. So it's like a poverty trap, to use that expression. And it's impossible for people, or very, very difficult for people to get out of it. And the system, or the lack of a system, of public services, particularly childcare facilities, compared to European countries, means that you're even further locked into it. Because we have massively expensive childcare here that is simply out of the reach of huge numbers of people, and those who could just about afford it before now can't afford it. And this is going to absolutely lock them into this situation. And it's a joke when the government talk about incentivising people to get into work, A, because there's no jobs, but B, because everything they are doing is actually trapping people and trapping more people in this situation. All the measures they've taken in the budget hit precisely the groups that are disproportionately affected by these. Women, children, the disabled, and the low paid. And you can add into that now people who took out mortgages at the height of the boom, who are trapped in a debt straitjacket from which, unless they get a serious write-down of that debt, they will be trapped in for a generation or longer. We are worse than those countries, and it is now spreading right across our society. Every measure they have taken is going to deepen the spiral downwards and make it worse. So it is not exaggeration for us to say we are heading into a 30s-style depression. And I personally believe this is going to happen in the rest of Europe now, because the experiment that they've tried here, that they've tried in Greece, that has absolutely collapsed our society is in a depression now, at every level. Is happening now in Spain, is spreading into Italy, they're starting to do it in England, it's going to move to the centre of Europe. And the one hope the government have held out as this sort of thing for us to be optimistic about, even though we're going through a lot of pain, is, but we're going to be able to export to Europe because we're much more competitive now. But now, in Europe, nobody has any money either. So that's not going to work. We are spiralling into a European-wide depression on a 30 scale. No doubt about it. And unless we go into major reverse gear in the opposite direction from where they are going, we are in deep trouble and we will be paying a very, very serious price for this. A price most of us, I think, can't even imagine. You can only understand if you look back to what happened in the 1930s and the horrors that followed. And this is, as I say, it's cold and calculated, right? You know, I asked the Taoiseach today in the Dáil, I said, who did you meet before the budget? Did you meet the disability groups? Did you meet the community groups? Did you meet the trade unions? Oh yes, I met them. I talked to them. But he didn't listen to them, right? Now why did he not listen to them? Because the group that really wrote the budget, and that he does listen to, are, among others, there's a few of them, but one of the most influential is a group called the Clearinghouse Group. That is made up of State Street, who are speculators, Wealth Asset Management Bank for billionaires, right? Barclays, the Bank of Ireland, all the crowd down in the Irish Financial Services Centre, where all the speculation on derivatives and futures and so on, right? And they are in a committee that meets 6 times a year, also has loads of little subgroups, which is chaired by the department of the Taoiseach, right? That's the level of access they have. They literally, and I mean literally, wrote the budget last year. To the point that Michael Noonan's script, when he was defending aspects of the budget, repeated word for word, cut and paste literally from the submission produced by this clearinghouse group made up of this gang. Right? That's the level of access they have. So it's very, very simple. The bondholders and speculators who caused the crisis are the ones who are directing the government as to how to deal with the crisis. And surprise, surprise, they're saying, make the poor pay, make the working class pay, make the vulnerable pay, protect us. Enda says, there's nothing we can do about it, the Troika are telling us to do it, but interestingly, there's a few issues which he's willing to stand up to the Troika on. Why? Because the clearinghouse group have told him to. Financial transaction tax. One measure, 0.1% on the billions that go through the Irish Financial Services Centre in speculation on shares and derivatives. 0.1%, which is the pathetic proposal coming from Europe. Enda is saying, I will not impose that. That one measure alone would be 500 million. 1%, 5 billion. Right? If they were willing to do that. But Enda's willing to stand strong on that one. He'll impose on the poor, the vulnerable and the working people, but he's going to stand up for the speculators when it comes to making sure they don't even have to pay 0.1%. Same with corporate tax. That's a red line issue for this government. Nothing else is. Promises, pre-election promises about child benefit, that's not a red line issue. None of this stuff, but not touching the corporation tax rate is a red line issue for them. So the point I'm making is, we are up against people who are not just sort of accidentally doing what they're doing. It's not because they're managing things badly. It's not because they're incompetent, and it's not even because they're corrupt. This is cold-hearted decision to side with the super rich, with the speculators, with the bankers, with the golden circle, and sacrifice everybody else's livelihood. Now, if you understand that's the real agenda, then the only thing you can hit back with is the same level of determination, ruthlessness, if you want to put it in those terms, and organisation that these people have. Any idea that is going to be resolved by waiting for another government to be elected, by speeches being made in the Dáil, by electing another group of people into the Dáil, forget it. Forget it. The decisions are being made over there by people who are not elected by anybody. So the idea that electing a few people into the circus that is the Dáil is going to make any difference, forget it. I'm not saying we shouldn't stand in elections, but don't believe for a minute that that's going to change anything. Because it is primarily a diversion. It's like theatre in there. They're playing games. It's a distraction. So you're looking at this hand while the other hand is doing the real business. That's what's going on in there. And we need to understand that. So the answer to this problem is for people to get active and to challenge the real power in society, which is the power of money concentrated in places like the Irish Financial Services Centre, in Ailbhe, the giant profits of the multinational corporations, the super wealthy elite in this country who have enormous amounts of money, and to whom they have got richer in the last 2 or 3 years. There's been a direct transfer of wealth from those who are being impoverished by the austerity to those at the top. I won't bore you with the figures, but I can tell you that's true. Profits have gone up. The concentration of wealth in a small number of hands has increased over the last 2 or 3 years. So to conclude, if that's the picture, and I'm absolutely certain it is the picture, we can't resolve this problem unless we take very, very radical measures to take that wealth back off them and put it back into society, into our public services, into state investment programs to put people back to work, building the schools, the hospitals, developing our natural resources, our forests, our seas, our oil and gas, which is currently being given away to private multinational companies. You can go through the list of our resources, which in fact the government are also have restated in the budget they're going to sell. The forests to be sold this year. 7% of the landmass of the country going to either the Chinese or a company headed up by Bertie Ahern, which is a Swiss money laundering bank. Right? That's where our forests are going. So we have to organise, take that money off them. Now, how can we do that? How can we do it? And I think the key thing is everybody here needs to understand themselves to be a leader. The politicians have told people for the last 10 or 15, well, longer, for as long as I can remember, vote for me and I'll change it for you. Right? Any politician who tells you that is a liar. And let's be honest, the majority of working class people believed Eamon Gilmore when he said, I'm not going to cut child benefit. I know in Dún Laoghaire, because that's where he's from and where I'm from, people did not believe he could sell out to this extent. They knew Labour weren't perfect, they knew Labour weren't that radical, but they didn't think Labour would do this. Right? And people are demoralised as a result of that. But being demoralised is no good. We have to learn the lessons. And the lesson is, nobody, including Richard Boyd Barrett or Joe Higgins, who tells you, vote for me and I'll sort it out, is telling you the truth. They are lying to you. They are lying to you. So we have to break from that notion of politics. And the leadership is in this room. And what people need to think is, how do we mobilise the strength in society which can meet this group on the streets, in the factories, in the workplaces? Somebody used the phrase, they are grinding our society to a halt. They're grinding our society to a halt. We need to grind their society to a halt, right? We need a general strike. Not as the last, but as the beginning. The beginning. To physically take it back off them, right? And then we begin to take control of the economy, of the schools, the hospitals, the empty houses that are sitting there when there's thousands of people on the housing list. We need to physically take control of these resources. We need to physically prevent them taking our forests off us. We need to physically prevent the oil and gas being handed over to Tony O'Reilly and Shell and all the rest of them, right? Now that can only be done through a mass movement of people. And a mass movement of people cannot be built by the leadership again, of the trade unions or anyone else. It begins with everybody here. Tomorrow there's a demonstration about child benefit cuts. If it's just me calling for it, the media, a few posters, we get a small number of people, right? If everybody here goes from this room tonight, and it's only 24 hours, we're not going to have a mass protest, but if everyone goes to this room and says, how many people do I know? How many people do I know who might be affected by the range of cuts that are in? I'm going to text them all, or even better, I'm going to phone a few of them and say, come on, come out tomorrow. Don't get angry, come out. Because everybody here is part of a network. That network could be a residents' association. It could be the place you work. It could be the college that you're in. It could be just your neighbours and friends on your street. But everybody is part of a network. And everybody has to begin to see themselves as leaders of that network. And sometimes that means doing things you've never done before. It means taking your courage in your hands and saying, I'm going to speak up when before I was just silent. But we have to do it. Because they're speaking and they're organising all the time. Every minute we're doing nothing, they're doing something. So we have to do something to match that. And it begins with that. Tomorrow we can only do so much, but let's, for Christ's sake, make a fight in the next couple of days when they're going to vote these things through. And Labour are in trouble on this. I think they've wrestled with their conscience and won, but we should still make it as difficult for them as possible. And our agenda should be to bring this government down in the next 6 months.
Otherwise, we are banjaxed if they do this again to us in December of next year, right? So we have to aim to bring them down. You can't just magic a general strike, you have to build for one. So after this week, we have to have model resolutions going to every residents' association, every NGO, every civil society group, every union of students, every trade union branch. Don't wait.
I think it's really important that in this present time we don't divide ourselves amongst ourselves. And the truth is that you do all that work and lots of women do, so you've got to stand together and fight on that. And we shouldn't let them divide us. Saying, of course there are lots of lone parents who are men who suffer the same thing as lone parents who are women. But the point is not to say that it's kind of against women, but actually stand together and fight together, whether it's migrant workers, because what they're trying to do is divide us. And we shouldn't let them do it. We agree with you 100% on all the rights that lone parents should have. Single parents would say that and so on. I think it's really important. The second point is I agree with your two demands for a vote of no confidence in the leadership. I think this meeting should give a vote of no confidence in the bloody union leadership. I'm a member of SIPTU. When I get that newsletter from Liberty, it makes me sick. When Jack O'Connor is saying, come out on that day in February for a new deal. Now, I agree we should have a vote of no confidence in that. I also agree, by the way, that these should be got rid of. The point is, how do we get rid of them? And we should use them. We should use their capacity to mobilise, to take it further. We want to get rid of them. I absolutely agree. I couldn't imagine, and when you're talking about the drive-by deprivation, that applies to our union leaders. Jack O'Connor, in all his liberty things, never talks about deprivation. He talks about what Labour is doing in government and blah, blah, blah. Drive-by deprivation applies not only to the bosses, but to the union leaders. And the way we do it is to be cuter than them, use their call and push them further. Because there's no question the 24th was bigger because the unions were involved. What we didn't succeed in doing, but we can go on to do it, is build that forward.
This meeting, I listened to part of the debate, or a news report on the debate in Dáil Éireann this evening, and Joan Burton opened it, and she said 37% of the social welfare budget, it was the debate on the social welfare, 30% of the government, 37% I think of the government budget is social welfare. So it couldn't escape the cuts. Now, I think we have to challenge that, absolutely. It is completely illogical. There's no logic behind that, but they just keep repeating it. Because it costs money, it can't escape the cuts. That's their logic. Well, we should turn that logic around and demand the rich have 37% of the wealth, so therefore they can't escape the cuts. Or the billionaires have so many percentage of so much income, so they cannot accept the cuts. These are the kind of demands that we should turn around and not let them just make statements over and over again and get them into our subconscious and accept them. The meeting is about how do we do it. That's the main meeting. So that's one slogan I think we should raise. And I think I sympathise very much with all the people here who say we want to get rid of our trade union leadership, with the exception maybe of some people in the night side. You know who I'm talking about when I say that. And I sympathise absolutely with you when you say, let's get rid of Jack O'Connor, let's get rid of Bed. The way to do it, I think a number of people said, and I agree with it, the way to do it is not to ignore them, is not to boycott them, and to boycott their events. The way to do it is to get into our unions and take them over. And to take, when they call an event, we have to take over the event and make it not their event, but our event. And we saw that on the 24th. Why did McLuhan mention the words general strike? And that's because the people on the march were screaming for it and demanding it. And that's the only reason why it is. So we make our demands by taking over their events and making them our events.
Declan had to send up.
Sorry. I was only going to ask, I'm not sure, how much oil and gas rests off these glorious little shores? Because I tell you what, if something is not done about that, we won't get the price of a cup of tea out of it. Yeah. Now, I don't know how much is out there. There should be an independent, with nothing to do with government, an independent somebody come in there and see how much oil and gas is out there. And we should cancel all the agreements, because the last tranche, the first tranche in 97 was given out by Labour, went in and negotiated with the oil companies or the people that wanted them on its own. And the second tranche was given out by Ailbhe Gilmore there about 9 months ago, saying that he still couldn't get rid of the. Nobody wanted to drill for oil. Yet, the oil companies that had the previous plots was already striking a ridge. That Providence oil, that.
I was just pointing, there's people standing on the back. There's seats up there if you want.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, no, carry on.
The Providence oil, the share in them oil company, that oil company went up 400% in the previous 3 years. And apparently Ailbhe Gilmore wasn't aware of it when he gave away the rest of them. I'm just wondering how much, does anybody know?
I'll answer your question.
Yeah?
No, I do when we're coming back, whatever order. But
because with all the bills that we have, and some of them, I don't believe any of them are ours, but all the bills we have, what you pay bills with is money. Go on, sorry.
You know, I'll come back at the end when we're coming back.
Okay.
I'll give you an answer to your question.
Yeah. Lovely.
I just want to
Sorry. Do you want let the man go?
question. Is there a general election pending?
No.
No? And then why has Richard Bilton been going around Darndale for the last week? Canvassing, knocking on the door saying it's changing in the bottom, in the boundaries and all that. I tell you what, and I think it stands to show the people, they're feeling again themselves now that what they're doing is wrong. And he's panicking like mad that come the next election, Richard Bruton will not be in the dock. He'll be sitting on his pension, which is the reason why he won't continue to go near the pensions. They won't go near the bankers' pensions because the minute they go and hit the bankers' pensions, they know they're going to hit their own pensions because they set a precedence. And that means that then they can turn around and go after government pensions. And that's why they set back nice and easy. They said, no, don't come in. And it's also noted that for the first time in over 5 years, I got junk mail through my door from the Labour Party, which I've never got before. Which just proves, I think it proves beyond the point that really, they do know they're making a mistake. And unfortunately, we think about getting rid of O'Connor bed. Maybe I'm wrong, but surely that's only the union themselves getting rid of a union leader. The actual people, the union who are the people, members, they're the ones who have to get up, stand up as a one and get rid of your leader. The union themselves, because that is, people have this idea. I've seen, I'm involved with schoolboy football for years, and the top floor of schoolboy football talking about God's gift to schoolboy football. Till they realise.
What I'm finding on the parents' pages, people are tending to pit against each other, like, oh, well, we have this or you have that, or, you know, everybody needs to stop thinking what everybody else has and start fighting for your rights, start fighting against the government, because they're taking the fabric out of society. And everybody needs to stick together. This is what the government wants, is everybody pitting against each other to see what way the ground is, to see who, you know, what's the majority. Oh, we take off the bigger families because there's less bigger families than there are smaller families. So that's less people to give out. Everybody needs to unite together. Everybody's circumstances change all the time. One day or another, people are going to be in a position where they have no work, or they are working, or they can't afford childcare. So just for everybody to unite together and try and do your little bit, even if it's organising a local march. I know a lot of people, like with children, they can't get out. They're not able to, or they're not able to come up to Dublin or to go to Cork City for the marches or whatever. Do your little bit in your locality. Organise your marches. Start showing the government that you will not take these cuts any longer, because if they keep going, and they're going to go for us again and again and again till we're on the floor with nothing left. That's all I have to say.
The question of the bailout. No, there won't be, well, you can't say this for certain, there won't be a bailout. I wouldn't think there'll be a successive bailout similar to this. What the government will do is be able to get all sorts of underwrite guarantees for the borrowing on the markets. The ECB now is lined up and will be able to buy our short-term bonds as lender of last resort. So while there will be supports, the government will be able to say that it's not a bailout and therefore we've won this economic independence, economic sovereignty back. I'll just make this. Let's never make the mistake that creditworthiness or the lack of creditworthiness has some sort of association with austerity. I may lend money to a household quite confident that they will pay back. I am completely indifferent to whether the kids starve in that house, but I am quite confident that I will get paid back. And that's what's happening. The creditors will get paid back, and people will starve or people will go through deprivation here in Ireland. So, just because you have access to the market, look what's happening over in Britain. They will always have access to the market because they have their own currency. That's not stopping George Osborne and the Tories wreaking havoc in that country. I just want to confront this. I want to confront this thing about trade unions. And I hope you all know where I come from within the trade union movement. I'm going to make a couple of comments, and I'm going to put up a very positive proposal, as I try to do, always constructive. But I will be frank. I do not believe that you begin the hard work of building the broadest possible coalition of interests against austerity by attacking potential members of that coalition. I don't believe that passing motions of no confidence in members of other unions will win over the people who actually elected those members. Now, some people may disagree with me. Some members of SIPTU here may disagree with me. This is my own personal opinion. I have no doubt that if there was an election held in SIPTU tomorrow, Jack O'Connor would win hands down. He'd win hands down because he's quite popular in the union. I've seen his speeches at the divisional conferences of the union. You could say this about his, or this about him, or this about him, but I really don't. I find it difficult to wonder where that goes, what road that takes us down. And also, I wonder what road it takes us down if on February 9th, anybody from any trade union official gets on the platform is heckled and booed to the extent that they can't finish their speech. Now, this is just my opinion. I mean, you all have to disagree with that. And by the way, listen, I understand the anger of the rank and file and people outside of the trade union leadership. You think you have stories? Some of us who have been working in it, geez, we've got real stories. So here's a constructive proposal. Why don't, formal or informal or whatever way, people go and talk to actually the sympathetic officials to what we're about in the different trade unions. I'm not going to name their names here, but, I think you know them. We can all talk about it in conversation. Those officials who are on the left, those officials who, and not just in one union, not just Unite, but in other unions, who have argued the case for what we call a National Day of Action. It doesn't matter whether it's called a general strike or National Day of Action, as long as it doesn't take place on a Sunday, for Christ's sake. Go to those officials and ask them what they think would be the best tactic, and to actually then make sure the tactics that are being pursued by all cohere. I think that would be a practical suggestion. Now, you don't have to take their advice, but actually go and listen to them. I'm not asking you to go to David Begg or Jack O'Connor or whatever, but go to those officials, senior and middle ranking, and there's many of them in there, and ask them their advice. Listen to them, because they're in there struggling every day, not only on the day-to-day work of being a trade unionist, which, by the way, most of the time is spent negotiating redundancy deals, such as the economic crisis in this country, but are also trying to carve out a position for the trade union movement in civil society and in political society. So talk to them. If you don't want to talk to Jack or David, fine, I understand that. But at least talk to people who are on our side. That's a start.
Okay. Look, I think there is a tactical debate we need to have about how we get a general strike. I think the resolution that would be most useful to pass at this meeting is to say that we want to see a general strike against the austerity, and that we're going to campaign for that. And it's about linking together all of the different groups who are being attacked by the austerity. That has to be our agenda. Now, precisely what obstacles we encounter en route, and I do believe that the leadership of ICTU and the leadership of SIPTU are acting as obstacles at the moment. I do believe that, to be absolutely honest. I think the Labour Party has exercised its influence within the Labour movement and within civil society, to be honest with you, in order to try and dampen things down. And why wouldn't they do that, right? They have those connections, they have those networks. Those connections and networks help them get elected, and it would be odd in a way if they didn't use those connections with the leadership of SIPTU, the leadership of ICTU, to hold things back. And they have a shared, not entirely shared perspective, but they share some things in common. And the thing a lot of what they share in common is that they don't really believe that there's much alternative to the sort of market system, to be honest. And I mean, there is politics in this. You know, when Michael is closer to us than he is to them, and certain people who we won't mention listening to the left wing, it is actually because politically they're closer to us. Let's be honest about this. The politics are closer. Whereas, I've had conversations in the past with Jack O'Connor. I haven't had with David Begg. I think David Begg's role is particularly compromised, right? He was on the board of the central bank when all of this stuff was going on. Now, that is a bloody big problem, right? Jack O'Connor is a slightly different kettle of fish. But on the other hand, Jack O'Connor is on the National Executive of the Labour Party. That is a major conflict of interests. And I think that's how we can put it. We can say it is a major conflict of interest that the leader of the biggest trade union in the country is also on the National Executive of the party that is doing the dirty on working class people, right, and on trade union members. I mean, by any definition, that's a problem, in my opinion. And it has to be said, and it has to be said explicitly. So I agree with you. However, I agree with Michael when I say that is not the place to start. The place to start, because I tell you the biggest thing we're battling at the moment is demoralisation in the ranks of society, right? In the ranks of the working class, all sectors of society. And every single meeting I go to, the biggest thing we are battling against is a sense of futility that there's nothing you can do, right? Now, whatever we do, we don't want to add to that feeling. We need to raise people's confidence about their ability to change things, and about organisation and overcoming divisions, as Hazel said, because this is critical, right? Their main political weapon is division at the moment. And it's absolutely calculated. Divide public sector worker against private sector worker has been a key and very successful division they have used. You know, let's be honest about this. That argument has really got into people's heads. And we've to bloody root it out. Because it's bullshit, right? The idea that the division is public and private. But let's be honest, it has really penetrated. Because when people are backs against the wall, you sometimes grab for the easy solution. Right? And if I'm a private sector worker who's been absolutely hammered or lost my job, it's easy to buy into the argument, well, he has a job for life, what's he worried about? Right? When in reality, the low and middle income earners, whether they are in the public or the private sector, have been hammered. Some might have been hammered worse than others, and that's not exclusive to public or private, but the last thing we need to get into is a bidding war about who's been hurt more. And I would say the same about the issue of men and women and so on, right? Lone parents have been hammered. Most lone parents are women. Fact. But many lone parents are men. Fact. Right? We oppose attacks on lone parents, and we oppose any attacks
on vulnerable sectors of our society and on working class people. But let's not get into a bidding war of who's being hit worse or to be set against one another, because that would play into their hands. They're trying to play rural off against urban. That's another big one, right? And not only are the government trying to do that, but Fianna Fáil, the opposition, play up to that one because they don't have any TDs left in Dublin. So when they're in the country, they say it's the country's been hammered by all them Dubliners, right? And they do this. I'm telling you, they stand up at rallies over the septic tank charges and other things, and they say rural Ireland is being hammered by all the Jackeens in Dublin, right? And that's, you know, if you're in rural west of Ireland where you are being hammered, it's tempting to believe that could possibly be the explanation, right? So we've got to bloody overcome these things, and there has to be a group of people who are very conscious, confident, brave to stand up. Because when somebody stands in rural Ireland and says that, some of the people cheer, unfortunately, because they're so angry and they're so desperate, and you've got to stand up and bloody argue against it. Right? And there has to be an organised group of people who understand this. Because we're not short of resistance around the country at the moment. Look how many people have been on the streets in the last few weeks. 6,000 in Navan, 15,000 in Waterford, people demonstrating about the hospital services in Cork, 20,000 over Savita, carers, all sorts of rural schools demonstrations. They're happening everywhere. Everywhere, right? But in every single one of them, there's an argument, and it goes like this. And it was on the carers demonstration today. Maybe we'll get our cut reversed. If we link up with other people, that's harder, right? And the government play on that. And they come out and they invite the groups in. We'll talk to you. We'll look at your thing. We are taking you seriously. And maybe even they'll make a little concession for movement. And they're absolutely, Labour are masters at this. Because they know these people. They have those connections, and that's what they're doing. Right? So we need to be really bloody conscious about this. We are the people who argue for unity and solidarity. If the lone parents are being attacked, we all support the lone parents. If the disabled are being attacked, we all support the disabled. If people are fighting the home tax, we all support them. We support the people fighting against the septic tank charges. We support the people in rural Ireland fighting to defend their schools, and so on and so forth. We support the turf cutters' right to continue to cut turf on their land. And we also look for issues that unite them. And this is absolutely critical. That's what People Before Profit is, by the way. That's what we're trying to build. And this is the message we've been going around the country with. And we are getting lots of people involved. And then we have to hammer out a strategy. I'm not saying it might take years, but I think we need a strategy over the next few months. And I mean, people talked about the bailout. I don't know if I even want to go there, except to say this, right? Whether it's a formal or informal it's not even a bailout. What are we even talking about? Bailout program, right? Austerity program is what it is. And even if we exit the Troika program at the end of next year, we're into a thing called a fiscal treaty, which is a long-term austerity program. So it's the same thing. They don't need the formal Troika program because we just signed up to a treaty, which is a long-term Troika program. And we have the ESM, which is an institutionalised bank bailout, which we will pay for. Every state will pay for. We're on the hook for 11 billion, but they can up the contribution from Ireland or any other state whenever they like. Right? So they've now locked us into a permanent bailout of the banks and austerity program. The formality of what happens at the end of the year is to some extent irrelevant. So what are we going to do, and how fast can we do it? I personally think we have to bring this government down in the next year or so, and I think it can be done. Right? I really believe they can be brought down. There's not many governments who've done what they have done around Europe that have lasted their full term over the last few years, you may have noticed. There's been 2 or 3 changes of government in Greece. There'll probably be another one in the next 6 months, and that one probably will bring to power a government that are a party that is at least saying, we'll see do they carry it through, but it is at least saying we're going to repudiate the debt and we're going to end the austerity. And that is the sentiment. And they have gone from being a party of about 2 or 3%, about the same size as the radical left in Ireland, in about 3 years to being now the biggest party in Greece. That's how things can be transformed. The only slight concern I have about are they too focused on Parliament? I mean, we want to see them have a majority in Parliament, but are they building on the ground? And I've heard there are worries from what I've heard that they're not building on the ground. We have to build everywhere. You know, Fianna Fáil dominated this state for a very simple reason. What was the expression? Fianna Fáil had a come on at every crossroads. And it was absolutely true. They had a come on at every crossroads. Networks, a bit like the football or the GAA, right? That's the sort of networks we have to build. And otherwise, we won't get rid of the union leaders that are letting us down, and we won't get the general strike. You have to have those networks to do it, right? Now, that is hard work, but I do believe it can be done at the moment. I mean, when I go and speak at a meeting in Listowel or Mullingar, where, to be honest, if I had gone and spoke there 2 or 3 years ago, there would have been 2 men and a dog at the meeting, right? Nobody would have turned up because they were going to the Fianna Fáil meetings or the Fine Gael meetings. But now, when we go down there, 50, 100, 150 people turn up. Those people were at the centre in areas where we had nothing. We're at the centre of the successful boycott of the campaign. Highest rates of resistance were in places like Donegal, right? So this is a change, a sea change. The roots and the foundations of the 2 parties that have kept us down for 70 years, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and Labour, who betrayed us, are breaking apart. But how fast can we get in and fill that gap? And understand that we have to have that level of roots and deep sort of connection with every sector of society. Sports clubs, people involved in the arts, people involved in the colleges, and of course in the unions. Right? So that is what we have to do. And I would say to people, as a proposal, A, we should commit ourselves to fighting for a general strike by the end of March, right? In an effort to defeat the austerity, and we should work towards that. Whoever has to be kicked out of their post to do that, let's do that, right? But let's aim for that action, which could bring the government down. And then let's start with the protest tomorrow to put in a good fight before this bill goes through. And let's have a serious mobilisation for the national meeting of the household charges campaign, which is in the first 2 weeks of January. And we need to pull people from those networks, right? So if you are part of a football club, do you know what I mean? Well, whatever. Well, I am now at Ballybrack. But it's to bring the activists, if you like, from there to that meeting. Because they're all complaining about the cuts to their grants and all the rest of it. We have to bring them there. And if we can pull, I don't know, 1,000 or 2,000 people to a national meeting, which is really representative of all the different cross-section of Irish society, that group would be capable of calling a general strike. I mean, I'd like to get up in the Dáil tomorrow. I will, if you want, call in the Dáil tomorrow, call for a general strike. I've done it before, but because I say it won't make it happen. But if a meeting of 2,000 or 3,000 delegates from all over the country says we're going to have a general strike by the end of March, and we're going to make a serious push within the unions to make that happen, that could happen. And that's the project we're setting ourselves off. There's €1.5 trillion worth of oil and gas around the country. The oil companies know it. We don't need surveys to be done. The information is in the hands of the government. 1.5 million at current prices. The known estimates, they're estimates, but they have very strong evidence. There's been a big advance in the seismic technology, which allows you to estimate what's there and so on. At current market prices, the value of the known prospects or discoveries around the country is €1.5 trillion, right? And that is the prize that the multinationals and so on are playing for when they cripple our country and are stealing our resources while we're being hammered with austerity. That's what we have to take back. But we need you to do that. Yeah, well, no, it's fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, so one thing I've got to say is, as regards, and Michael, you know this as well as I do. Every member of a trade union does not get to vote for David Baker, Dr. Connor. You know that. You vote for delegates, and that doesn't happen. So if you ask every woman to have Baker, if you want Dr. Connor on tomorrow,
I think we should just put the proposals. It's fair enough. You put the proposal. Just put the proposal.
The proposal is, well, and it's part of what you've got to do, that we call, unless Jack O'Connor and David Baker and Nick calls, the SIP calls general strike by such a date, I think we're talking by the end of March.
that we call for their resignation. Right? That's a clear cut proposal. And Richard, and I think what you said there about the broad campaign to bring them all together, that it should be just one umbrella. Because I know I met you at school as a desk group, and it's a perfect example of dividing conquer. And I heard that same sentiment with different desk schools. We get our bit and we leave the campaign, and that's exactly what happened. So you're 100% right there. It's divide and conquer all the way, man. Like what you said happened to the carers today. But I mean, that's my proposal as regards that if they don't call a general strike, that we and it goes out to the press statement of this meeting that we call for the resignation.
Can I just slightly modify the proposal?
Yeah,
slightly modified, right? I propose that this meeting says that we are now calling for and campaigning for a general strike against the austerity to be organised by the end of March, and that we will stack. Because you see, this man is right. We have to have candidates to replace them, right? That we will stand candidates and seek to remove trade union leaders who are not supporting that call. I would put it that way, right? Because there's no point in abstractly calling for the resignation if we can call for it, but we need then to stand people against them and campaign for it, right?
Goes in behind.
Yeah. So can I propose it that way? That that's what we're campaigning for and calling for, and that we will seek to stand candidates against the existing leadership or challenge the current leadership in every way we can if they're not supporting and campaigning for that end. Would that be a fair resolution? Those in favour of that?
Yeah.
Anybody against?
Yeah.